I don't think we've spoken enough about God's longing, and that our longing is really a echo of God's deep longing, and that my existence and your existence, that we are here because of God's longing, that we've been desired into existence by a great longing, by a God who longs for us to be here. And somehow, and this has been a lifesaver for me, that somehow within my longing, God dwells.
Hello and welcome to 2025. If you're new here, my name is Matthew Lewis and you are listening to the Follower Podcast, a place for thoughts and conversations about what it means to follow Jesus in the world today. Now we're kicking off the new year with something a little different because this year I am bringing out my very first book. It feels good to say that. The book is called Human, and it's a collection of poems, short stories, and personal reflections on our deepest longings for goodness, beauty, and truth, and how those longings can ultimately lead us to the person of Jesus. The book will be available from the 1st of February, and I thought that it would be nice to build toward that by sharing a series of conversations here on the podcast around its main themes. And so, for the next 5 weeks, you can look forward to conversations with Trevor Hudson, Liam Burns, Lisa Coons, John White, and Nathan Foster on the themes of longing, truth, goodness, beauty, and the humanity of Jesus. I'll also include a reading or two from the book in each episode, and those are the ones that will speak to the topic of each conversation, and hopefully it'll get you a little excited to get a copy for yourself. Maybe one day, when I'm big, I'll be able to tell you, use that phrase. I've always wanted to use it. You can get it wherever books are sold. But for now, you'll be able to get it at my website, mattlewis.co.za, where South Africans will find a link to purchase it locally, and those of you in other parts of the world will find a link to Amazon. I am what I think is a healthy combination of nervous and excited about all this. It's always a bit vulnerable sharing your work with the world in this way. But regardless of how many people do or don't buy it, I do sincerely hope that each of these conversations are a gift of their own to you as you listen to them. If you're new to or not sure about Jesus, I think both the book and the conversations will help you explore your own humanity and how, in a sense, you have been handcrafted for friendship with your Creator. If you're already a follower of Jesus, then like me, I'm sure there are times when your friendship with God gets a little stale, when you lose sight of the miracle and wonder of it all and slip into dull religion. For those of you who find yourself in that space, my prayer is that this book and these conversations will help you come alive again to the gift of your own life and to the miracle of Jesus. Now, he really is what all this is about in the end, because, to quote from the book, in all the mingled ambiguity of heartbreaks and hallelujahs that living has served me, I have found neither companion nor master as proficient in the lost art of being human as Jesus. And so, with all that said, I hope you enjoy this first episode on longing with my friend Trevor Hudson. And Trevor, thank you so much for making the time. Just really grateful for you.
Huge privilege, Matt, to be part of this conversation, and huge congratulations to you for your labor of love in writing Human. It's really an unusually special book.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have found this whole process very how could I say, a bit scary, really. You know, you write these things, you let them out into the world, and there's a lot of vulnerability in that process. So we'll just see what the Lord does with it. But into the book, and so kind of some of the premise of the book is it kind of wrestles with this idea of longing as an entrance point, and this idea that we have longings, and what do we do with our longings? I call it the ache inside of us. And in the foreword to the book, which you so kindly wrote, you have this phrase where you say, I think it was a nun who said to you, pay attention to your longings because they are your bus ticket home. And I just thought that was such a good place to start. What did you mean by that?
Yes, I used to go and visit Sister Margaret Magdalene. She lived in Brakpan in South Africa. And once a month I'd go see her. I think I was in my 40s then. And I must have been talking a little bit about, you know, my own longings and hopes and desires and yearnings. And then, you know, in one of those sentences that kind of scorches its way into one's heart forever, and I have a sense, you know, that kind of this sentence is coming to me not only from Sister Margaret. She said to me, Trevor, stay close to your longings. They are your bus ticket home, and so that sentence has been a huge source of encouragement for me to really, really trust that if and as I pay attention to the deepest longings of my own heart, that they will lead me to my true home in God. And I think that's the metaphor of the bus ticket home. Almost being led by my deepest longing into the heart of God.
Love that. Now, see, my tension with this as we wrestle with this is this idea of longing. So we all have longing. I think that's the first thing to acknowledge. Sure. And I love this metaphor that you're using of this bus ticket home, and there's this invitation if we pay attention to our deep longings. I think you use the language of attending to our longings. I think that's lovely. But there is a tension to manage here. On one level, you know, eternity's been set in our hearts. There is this kind of soul level memory that is our longing. On the other level, the heart is deceptive above all things. and we need to be careful of the appetites and longings that are within us. Can you maybe speak a bit to that tension?
I think it's a tension that I think is really critical for us to acknowledge. I think I've got my source right, but I think it was John Calvin who said that the human heart is a factory of idols, that our heart also is constantly creating idols. Idols to which we attach our longings. And so that tension of longing, or the tension of desire, or the tension of yearning is, I think, one that we always need to be aware of. And that takes some good friends to talk with about our longings. I think it invites us into a space of prayer and quiet, so that we can sift through our longings, and perhaps begin to notice those that really are true and we need to embrace and follow, and those that are potentially really destructive and could really sabotage our lives and our relationships, not with God and with each other. So for me, the tension that you are alluding to is a tension that I know very well. It's very real, and I think that's part of the mystery of the human heart, of our hearts.
And I love that, we're talking about preserving this tension, and not some things are not to be resolved, but some things are, we live in the tension of these things. And it's been my experience that most of those places of tension necessitate relationship. Yeah,
Right.
because they can't be easily resolved at the conceptual level. And I think that's
Right.
maybe a lot of the time where we go with this longing conversation, these aches of our heart, is we can get very conceptual about it, and then we can move to one extreme where no, you must just shut down all your emotion and all your desires, and we kind of drift into the place of suppression there, which is neither good psychology nor good theology, really. But then on the other hand, we can go to the place of license, which is what does your heart want? Do whatever you feel. But the tension necessitates relationship. It's not something that's easily resolved. It's something we have to work through in friendship with God. Any thoughts on that idea?
I think that it's really critical for us to, and I'm going to, if I may, riff off some of what you're saying, Matt. I think it's really important for, let me pick up the word relationship. I think it's really important for me to be or to have one or two relationships with folk with whom I can reflect honestly upon my longings. And as you say, and I would really say amen to this, that this isn't so much a conceptual, abstract, intellectual head trip. For me, I think all we need to do really sometimes to get in touch with our longings is to look at our diaries, to look at how we spend in our time, to look at how we spend in our money, to look at what we are worried about, to look at what's making us anxious. So I just think there are a number of street level questions that we can ask ourselves and ask each other that will get us beyond a kind of intellectualizing around, the great big longing in our heart for God, and take us into what we are really longing for. Because I think not now. I really do believe that our lives are, for better or for worse, shaped by our longings. So I need to look at those longings and look at my life and how it's been shaped, and then I think my life, my own everyday life, gives me a few clues as to where my heart is postured or orientated at any given moment. And I think there's a sense, certainly, and maybe this is more self-disclosure than you want, but I find myself, I can shift from one longing to another. I can move away quite easily sometimes, in a frightening way, from what I do know is my deepest longing, and that longing which I know will lead me home. And so I think it's it's not so much a kind of morbid introspection that we're invited into. I just think it's some good friendships, soul friendships, whatever you want to call them, where we're paying attention to our lives in the company of kindred spirits who are willing to help us pay attention to our lives.
I love that.
Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, and I love how you've grounded that in relationship, because it's a very holistic view of how God comes to us. And I think sometimes at least when I speak with people, and even in my own journey, I can, used a language of, I want to hear from God. And then very often that picture of hearing from God is kind of like, well, me going up into a mountain by myself in a cave. And there is some of that. There is a way in which the Spirit whispers into the quiet space. But very often Jesus meets me through people and through relationships and through processing in that space. And so being able to discern my longings there is very important. And then I think it's really interesting what you were talking about how quickly our longings, we can shift from our longings, and how very often, and this is a thought I'd actually love to play with you and get your feedback here. I didn't write about this in the book, maybe another book, but when I think about longings, I've almost like pulled them apart into the idea of deepest longings. So that's why the book very specifically says how our deepest longings lead us home, and then strongest longings. And for me, there's a distinction there, because very often the longings or the appetites that are the strongest are not necessarily the deepest. And because those strongest longings are formed by the flesh, the world, and the devil, right? And so there's these elements that are acting on me, making me have an appetite for something. And very often those more superficial but stronger longings can actually distract me from the deeper longings, which are truer to the person of God. Thoughts around that?
Two threads in what you were saying, and maybe I can be attentive to one, both of them. The first, your first part of what you were speaking about, of just paying attention to, with others, to the grounded realities of our lives, that is going to yield clues as to what we really long for. And for me, that's it kind of underlies a conviction that has become stronger and stronger for myself as I've gotten older, that reality is God's home address in our lives.
Wow.
So the more than, and so for me not to be frightened by the realities of my life, but rather to face them with the conviction that this is going to be the place where God really addresses me and speaks to me, and that I don't, as you were saying, don't have to go up a mountain and be on my own. I simply can face the realities of my life and what's going on in my life, and if I can do that with one or two trusted friends, I think my responses and my behaviors and my anxieties and my concerns will give me some clues as to where my heart is attached.
Grounded, a reading from the book. I'm sure, like me, you've gathered the scars and wrinkles that roll in with time. Those storm clouds that build on a summer afternoon, heavy with the dark promise of a downpour. You're probably crammed full of stories. Most people are when we're wise enough to listen. Stories of scraped knees, hot tea, simple sandwiches on picnic grass, and dishes. Some that sparkle clean, freshly packed on the kitchen shelf, and others that rise high in the sky like Everest, casting their humbling shadow over your best attempts to have it all together. Don't miss any of it in your pining after grandeur. The scars, the stories, the dishes, all of it is a gift. These monuments to the mundane are essential to the work of staying grounded, which any of us hoping to be human must ultimately be.
And then your second reflection around deepest and strongest longings, and that how culture and the world and advertising, media, and etc. shapes our longings. I think you said world, flesh, and devil. For me, and I certainly acknowledge that to be a reality, and I also think it's sometimes paying attention to what our strongest longings are, that from there we can maybe begin to drill down
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
into some of the into some of the deeper longings. So there's, I can't, as it were, bypass
Yeah.
the strong longings and almost kind of hit the hidden stream of longing immediately.
Wow.
I think there is a sense in which, if I can really pay attention to my longings for success and longings for more money in the bank and longings for a, a good reputation, if I can really name those longings without shame, and then begin to explore them with others and with God, and then allow them to become the kind of, just, I like to use the image, I know it's a bit mechanical, forgive me for that, maybe to drill down,
Yeah.
into that where deep calls out to deep. And that's a journey, and that journey to the heart and to the deepest longings of the heart doesn't happen overnight. I really do think it's a lifetime journey, and maybe we shortchange ourselves and others when we perhaps communicate to others that we kind of reach the heart quickly and easily
Yeah.
in a
So
kind of
good.
microwave fashion.
Wow.
I'm not sure about that. I think it's a longer journey, and that longer journey involves attention to those very strong desires and the very gradual conversion of those desires, transformation of those desires, or if you want to use a really old-fashioned word, the purification of those desires. I think that's I think that's a journey of a lifetime.
So good.
You know, for us to really begin to live in that place where I truly, like Jesus, will only one thing, and that is Abba and Abba's heart and Abba's will.
So good. So good. Oh, so many good thoughts there. I think the one I think is really important, which has been very helpful to me in my journey and some of our conversations that we've had over the years, is I don't think I was ever explicitly taught a theology of suppression, but I think I kind of implicitly picked it up. And what I mean by that is there are appetites and things in me that are broken because I'm a human being in a broken world with a sin proclivity. And often my response to that was to kind of shut them down. And I translated that as faith, as being faithful. So this idea of like taking every thought captive and this kind of thing. And so, at a very practical level, like the temptation of lust or the longing for lust, which many men struggle with, as I have. And I would have like this longing in a lustful space. And then I would like shut that down and then kind of run to something that in my mind was far more spiritual or Christian. And I think you said to me once, you gave me two images. You said, okay, what if we took all the things that were broken with you, all your sin issues? What if we just brought them really close, like in an embrace, and just stood with them under the grace of God? It was a very helpful image for me. And then the second image you gave was, you said this, you said, sin does the most damage when it goes into hiding, when we kind of push it beneath the surface of ourselves. And so I think there's just what you're speaking about is really helpful because it speaks to some of the fear that we have around when we see those things that we'd rather be kept in the dark, when we grow in awareness of that can instill a fear in us. And our response can be to try and shut that down. But what you're saying is we can actually have more confidence in God than that. And we can actually trust that even in those places that we might be ashamed of, even in those places that we wish weren't the way they were, if we can pay some attention to that, they themselves can be invitations into the deeper place that God would have us be. So, for example, in my lust story, that lust is really a longing for intimacy. And intimacy is really a God-given desire for relationship. And so if I'll ask the question, instead of shutting it down and moving, spiritually bypassing, like you say, to something that feels more Christian, put on a worship album, read another book, go to another conference, try and layer and layer and layer. But if I'll actually listen to that and say, okay, why is the lust appetite there? And what is that telling me about myself? That even that which we would label sin is invitation, if we'll allow it to be. Thoughts on that?
Now, again, just listening carefully to you, Matt. Two immediate responses. I think, you're talking about the suppression, or like maybe out of fear, closing down, and kind of I need to divert maybe myself to something else. I'm struck by how tired and exhausted many followers of Christ are. And I've wondered a lot about the exhaustion that so many Christ followers feel. And I wonder if we get tired from just trying to put a lid and keep the lid down on all these longings.
Yeah.
It can be such a tiring job. And I think we've been, created in such a way that the longings of our heart in many ways are very energizing. They really do give energy, and they can give energy in different directions. But I think the suppression of let's say of a very lustful longing, and then I suppress it by wanting to do something else, rather than maybe just putting my arms around, as you were saying, putting my arms around that part of myself, the lustful part of Trevor, and bringing it to the banquet feast where Christ welcomes the poor, the crippled, and the lame, parts of myself as well as the world. It's at the banquet that transformation happens.
Gosh.
That's where I doubt whether highly doubt whether willpower transforms the heart.
Yeah.
And I speak, and I think I've said this to you, I'm married to Debbie, and she often says to me, Trevor, when you die, I'm going to put on your tombstone, he really tried. So she knows me better than anyone else, and knows how I've tried.
Yeah.
And trying involves will. It reveals the limitations of the will. The will by itself cannot transform the lustful or greedy or whatever self. Grace can do that. And then also, and I don't want to play down totally the place of the will, but then I can let the deepest longings of my heart, when I'm being attentive to them, prayerful about them, with others, with God, I can then let my heart, and I need to think more about what I'm going to say, but let me risk it here and risk it with your listeners and watchers, that to let my heart lead my will. It just somehow, I'm going to place my will at the service of my deepest heart's longing, and make choices and decisions, which I'm responsible for, that bring my life into greater harmony with eternity in my heart.
Bottle the Ocean, a poem from the book. We sit silent in wide-eyed wonder, while constellations trace their way across the pitch-black sky. We breathe deep the scent symphony of springtime blossom. We huddle warm by a flickering flame as crisp winter mornings wake the wild and bird songs fill the air. We love and make love. We wipe wet eyes as babies cry, mothers sigh, and loved ones die. We eat ice cream, lick by mouth-watering lick as pecan praline and salted caramel drip sticky down a wafer cone. And even though we try, we have yet to plumb the depths of our own infinite selves, so we reach for the heavens and pull down fistfuls of stardust, because how do you bottle the ocean? Yes. And so that, for me, that's just a very freeing posture. I think I feel that lightness come. And I think when you speak about the tiredness of many followers of Jesus, I think that's true. And part of that is how we sort of, when I started learning about apprenticeship in the way of Jesus, or discipleship, or formation, or I think my reflex reaction was to try and take hold of the practices as mechanisms to try and architect my own formation in the way of Jesus, which is just, in retrospect, is crazy. But I think that's where I was. And more I realized that actually the way of Jesus is an invitation unto surrender. It's an invitation unto rest in him. And it's a recognition that I can't do, actually, what only God can do. And how our longings invite us there. I wanted to speak finally about the idea of unresolved longing. And there's this phrase, I can't remember if you said it or I read it somewhere else, but I just love it so much that one of the things you have definitely said to me is, I pray that you would be reasonably satisfied in this life and eternally satisfied in the next. And then there's this idea of there are no unfinished symphonies on this side of eternity. And so as followers of Jesus, there's that phrase of Jesus, all I need is you. Or like, come to Jesus and you'll be fully satisfied. And again, there's tension to manage here, because on one level, that is true. Jesus says, if you knew who I was and what I'm offering, you'd drink, you never thirst again. But then on the other level, it's like, I don't know. I don't think I've ever met a follower of Jesus who isn't longing. And I think that's an important dynamic in our friendship. Thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah. I was helped very, very much by a letter which I received from a mentor, and I think I can name him because he's been so important in my life. Dallas Willard, a philosopher, a Christian writer. And I think I must have, I can't remember what I wrote about, but I must have written a little bit about my restlessness and my sense of discontent. And I will never forget that response, and I wish I had it available here to read. And perhaps I can send the letter to you, and you can maybe put it somewhere, and it can come up somewhere with this podcast.
Yeah.
But he said, maybe, Trevor, you just need to accept that you're always going to be partly discontent and restless in this world, and it's going to be God's gift to you to keep you seeking. And for me, that is the tension, that there is, that I can really share a testimony to how Jesus meets us in our thirst, and in such a way that we will never be thirsty again. I really can. I can also, at the same time, give a testimony to how Jesus meets me and releases a seeking. And the word seek is one of the most important words in Scripture. Um, and one of the most important words on the lips of Jesus, seek first the kingdom. So there is a sense in which he meets us in our thirst and releases a thirst. Um, that a thirst for God, a thirst for God's reign to come more deeply, a thirst to respect other image bearers as God's precious image bearers and to love them well and deeply. So that letter, and it was a letter, gave me kind of permission just to accept the reality that I do live in this world. My heart aches, to use your language, for another world, which I in part experience now, and one day will experience more fully and more deeply. That I do look through, a little bit through a mirror in
Yeah. Yeah.
not fully clearly at the moment. Yeah.
Yes.
But I
Yeah.
will see face to face one day.
Yes. 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 And part of that is embracing our eternal nature. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the good news about our lives. Yeah, as precious image bearers.
Yeah. So we would say to someone who's listening to this or someone who reads the book, if you find in your following of Jesus a kind of restlessness that is never fully resolved and sometimes grows. Sometimes you find yourself more restless in your devotion to Jesus, that something's not wrong, and that perhaps actually that's part of the tradition.
Deeply so. And I think, and again, if I may just riff off what you're saying and build on it a little bit, that again, that tension of thirst satisfied and thirst released, that tension is a meeting place.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a place out of which I pray. It's a place out of which I live. Uh, and as I pay attention to that tension and live in it rather than resolve it too easily or slip to one side only, I think it then truly my longing is my bus ticket home. But the bus is on the road and I'm traveling and I'm on a journey and I'm on a pilgrimage. And I think that was the wisdom of Sister Margaret so many years ago when she shared that sentence with me.
So good. Thank you, Trevor, for this conversation. As we finish, any final thoughts that you would want to say around longing that we haven't covered?
I don't think we've spoken enough, Matt, about God's longing. And that our longing is really a echo
Wow.
of God's deep longing, and that my existence and your existence, that we are here because of God's longing, that we've been desired into existence by a great longing, by a God who longs for us to be here. And somehow, and this has been a lifesaver for me, that somehow within my longing, God dwells. So I think, that our longing is a very, very small, faint reflection of the infinite longing in God's loving heart for each of us, that God longs to be in friendship with each of us. And we see that powerfully expressed in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
I love that. And so even as we experience our own longings, to see those as reminders of the longing of God for us, and how that has the power to maybe transform what can sometimes be quite painful into something gentle, something encouraging, something healthy, as I long. So I woke up this morning, there are parts of me that are so grateful for the life I have. And there are other parts of me that seem to be unquenchable within me. And that can be a very heavy burden to carry, or, as you pointed out, that can be a reflection to me of, this is the smallest fragment of the longing that God has for you. And that can be an invitation to worship, really.
And a wonderful, wonderful sign of God's Spirit dwelling within you.
Well, that's it for our conversation this week, friends. So good being with you. Thanks for listening in. You'll be able to find the book 1st of Feb at mattlewis.co.za. Next week, we've got a great conversation with Liam Burns, where we discuss truth and our longing for it, what it is, and how we relate to it. Here's a little piece of that conversation for you. We'll see you then.
Part of what Jesus is inviting us to is relationship. And so we're in a relationship with him. He said, rivers of living water will flow from your inmost beings. And what if truth emerges as the personal presence of Jesus through our lives in a winsome, beautiful, good way that makes people wish it were true, even if they are feeling contested about the kind of world and life they're in, that they can't quite get hold of it, but they see lives. A missional witness, as it were, is to live the types of lives that people go, man, I wish that was true. I want that to be true because of the beauty of how it's being lived out.